right. Has anybody been in a driverless vehicle? It's here? No. Anybody been in maybe a partially automated, like a Tesla? Anybody want to be in? Yeah, you have?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, did you ride it in autopilot?
We had it kind of following the car in front of us.
Okay.
That's pretty much the extent of what we did.
Yeah, like with the dynamic cruise control? Yeah, okay. Hands off the wheel, too?
Maybe for a little bit. My buddy was a little sketched out at the time.
You weren't the one that climbed out and got onto the roof of the car while it was going down the highway? No. Okay. All right, that happened. I don't recommend it. So anyway, you gave a nice introduction, thank you. And I've been at UW for 11 and a half years or so now. I'm a transportation engineer. Depending on what I'm doing, you collect different titles and roles and things. So here's an example, but the couple that are, the last ones are more relevant to what we're talking about today. Of the Automated Vehicle Proving Grounds was a US DOT designation that we got in January. And then the Governor's Committee, Governor Walker created a committee to look at connected and automated vehicle legislation and things, and I'll talk about that briefly at the end. And then most recently, the State County Council on Climate Change, and this has been a nice opportunity to get involved on more of the energy and the climate impacts of connected and automated vehicles from a transportation engineering background. So I don't pretend to be an expert in energy. I mentioned I'm not going to talk much at all about electric vehicles. I'll really focus on automated vehicles while trying to bring in to some extent some of the implications without misspeaking, given my expertise. So I'm going to spend some time initially going over some basics and what are the implications and trends of automated vehicles, and then get into some of the other issues, and I'll certainly cover the proving grounds and what it means to do the testing and evaluation. So while I'm doing this, feel free to interrupt, I think, right? With questions? Absolutely. Yeah, okay. We can keep it a discussion. We have, it's until
1 full hour, yeah.
1 full hour, so yeah, plenty of time, I think. Well, in one sense, yes, plenty of time. In another sense, there are a lot of different aspects that you can really go deep into, and that's another thing I'm trying to avoid, so I can give you a broader introduction to this realm. So first of all, what is an automated vehicle? And you see a number of different examples on here, including an agriculture application. Here's the Tesla with the big screen, and this is a partial automated vehicle that's available to consumers right now. Some other more prototypical things, we do include truck platooning as well as part of our considerations. And the a key with this, just turning it down. Okay. Oh, good. Key thing to note here is that everything has wheels. So I'm talking about things that go on highways generally. I'm not talking about aerial or drones or rail or water or other military applications. We're talking about people and freight movement on a road network is the purview here. This is another example of an automated vehicle. Has anybody seen this around town? This was a picture that we just took this spring right on the Capitol Square. These are some legislators here. And this is a little 6-wheeled delivery device, personal delivery device is what it's called in statute now. They got something passed in June to allow these things to operate on sidewalks in Wisconsin. And well, some people refer to it as a automated cooler on wheels. That may be it. So in that sense, it is a novel type of thing. Whether it takes off and everybody's got one, just like the Segways, well, is remained to be seen. But the technologies in a device like this translate well to larger vehicle types. So it has ultrasonic sensors, it has camera, it has remote operation. And it's not as likely to kill anybody as a full-size vehicle. So if we can have these here and evaluate how they work from a technical standpoint, there are things that can be transferred. So I'm, so I support this kind of this investigation. This is another example of an automated vehicle from a company called Navia. Does anybody recognize this picture from just 3 weeks ago? I think 3 weeks ago today. In Las Vegas, a driverless shuttle was deployed there for a year-long pilot And about 2 hours after the ribbon cutting of a year-long pilot, a truck was backing in and scraped the front of it like you see here. And I show this because it was a big deal for us here in Madison, because we had a shuttle from the same company coming to Madison the following Monday to be here for a week of demonstrations and give some rides to the public. And the feds chose to investigate this more deeply, which means they put a hold on our exemption to be able to offer rides to the public. So it set us back. It was something I was personally disappointed in, but it actually just worked out well in terms of the attention and the media that we were trying to build around this, because this sort of thing happens. And the question about whether, so the vehicle itself was not at fault technically. It came up, it detected the truck, it stopped, its sensors had it stop. There's no pilot, there's no driver, there's no steering wheel or pedals on this. So it did what it's supposed to, but the truck proceeded to scrape it like you see. And yeah, so that meant that we weren't able to do our rides. So a lot of things to work out. So stepping back here a little bit for some context on this, the work that my group in transportation has done with the city of Madison goes back to what was called the Smart City Challenge a couple of years ago now that the US DOT issued. Columbus ended up winning it. And but nonetheless, we put together a nice team, and it catalyzed a lot of interest and brought a lot of people together around smart city applications, including technologies and communication networks, data hubs, and then from my standpoint, mobility was a big part of that. So enabling better access for maybe populations that don't already have that access, if you're blind or disabled or very young or very old, something like that, through ride sharing, different like use of those shuttles, just better information about bus and taxi and transit and bikes or bike sharing programs. All these sorts of things are part of this smart city ecosystem. And then within mobility, particularly auto mobility, we have these different areas of connected vehicle, such as computer science as a Y-Rover package, but you see V2V, V2I, V2X, that's vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, and vehicle to everything else, communication, Internet of Things. So think of connected vehicles as those are the vehicles talking to each other for safety applications, like if you're or talking to the infrastructure. If you're stopped at a traffic light and the signal has its own detection and it's sensing that a red light violation is coming the other way, it can let your vehicle know that there's T-bone crash imminent, and then you can perhaps react better to that. On the shared mobility, things like Uber, the shuttle, this is transit as well, taxi. So any mobility that you have by a vehicle that you don't necessarily own. Our automated vehicles is what I'm talking about largely, and then electric vehicles too. This is another computer science vehicle, the Innova Dash that we have here. It's a little two-seater that is really nice for research and development with communication systems, and it's electric. And then the Tesla and the Chevy, I think is what that one is, type of vehicles. So we can talk about these things all separately, but as you can imagine, there's a convergence of these, and the magic really is where they're starting to intersect, because they all build off of one another. This shows, so those are those same four categories there. And some of the implications or motivations are noted here. We have safety, and then I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of these. Vehicle miles traveled, like how much travel is created by some of these technologies or saved, and there's some counterbalancing influences going on. There are good implications on infrastructure, such as do we need the lanes to be as wide as they are now if the vehicles are being operated very, very accurately in an automated way. Parking infrastructure, if vehicle ownership goes down and ride sharing goes up, probably don't need as much parking infrastructure. That's very expensive, and there are better uses for that land if we can make it happen. And then the other things that you note there, The history of traffic fatalities is generally going down on a per mile traveled, but in each of the last 2 years, it's per mile it's plateaued, but the miles are also going up. So we're seeing fatalities tick up again each of the last 2 years, both nationally and in Wisconsin, and that's something we haven't seen for decades. And we're now approaching 40,000 deaths per year, and 15% of those, this portion is increasing too. So pedestrian fatalities, and other vulnerable road users is a concern, as what you imagine to be attributable to human error. You see over 90% of these fatalities are attributable in some way to human error, and that would include distracted driving, of course. People texting, looking at their phones, the drunk driving, drowsy driving, other things like that. So, or just inattentive driving, not reacting properly to these. And this is where we're hoping to see a lot of the safety gains with vehicle automation. In terms of energy, some of you recognize this, right? This is a Department of Energy graph, right? Did some people recognize this? I imagine, okay, yeah. They've been doing this, I think, since the 70s. Every year, we're taking all the different energy sources and then where they go. And I point down here, so first of all, the big dark one on the bottom is petroleum. And then this is the transportation box. And, so much of the, not only, carbon consumption and then emissions. I think it's about a quarter of everything here is used in transportation. So as we, so not just with electrification, but with automation and with connectivity and shared mobility, all four of those have different implications and opportunities to reduce this consumption of energy from transportation. I don't know if you can see all the details here, but there's the actual energy services. This is the useful output and then the rejected output. And I just want to draw your attention to this useful output coming or being very similar in magnitude to some of these others. But the rejected energy is a much bigger portion of that, the heat and other inefficiencies from fuel consumption in vehicles. So that's a big motivator. Now, in terms of the opportunities, this is another fairly recent report, again, from DOE. And if you go to this office, this office of it's written there. You can find this. And so there's this one, and then the next one is the lower bound. And what I want to just draw some attention to is that the way to read this is that there's a base condition right here in terms of actual energy consumption. And then there are the upper and lower bounds have to do with all of these different things here and whether it's going to go up or it's going to go down. And in this case, you can see that it's roughly tripling if you consider this a worst case scenario. Hunt for parking, that's vehicles or people driving around looking for a parking spot, and with better information about parking brought right into your vehicle, that search for available parking is going to continue to be better. So it goes down a little bit. Easier travel, that's the biggest one there. And that's among our biggest concerns as transportation people, is that with vehicle automation, people will have access to vehicles that are driving themselves, and so the personal cost or disutility to themselves of making a trip really goes down. And you can imagine the situation where people are buying these vehicles and then they're that much more inclined to live farther from their work, so a longer commute, so that would drive up VMT and increase sprawl. That's where this blue increase is largely coming from. Whether that plays out like that to a large extent, I think remains to be seen, but there will be some effect from that, undoubtedly, particularly among wealthier people who have more of these options and the access to the more expensive vehicles that can do that sort of thing. Underserved population, so people that may not be in a vehicle right now will have that opportunity, increasing the usage. There's some other small things here. Empty miles is another one that you hear people concerned about is if your automated vehicle brings you into your workplace and drops you off and then goes and drives out of town to some waiting area, that's an empty vehicle. And so there may be some increase arising from those empty miles driven. Smoother driving from these technologies would reduce the consumption. Higher speeds increases consumption and so forth. So this is the worst case. Now, switching to the better case. Now the scale of the axis changes a lot here. So you have the same baseline, but instead of going up to 200%, it's actually coming down by down to below 40% or so. So it's a 60% reduction. And looking at these, again, easier travel has some increase. The hunt for parking goes down. That didn't change that much. Ride sharing, shared mobility. This is a big trend that we're seeing playing out already. It's with better access to shared mobility, whether it's transit or mobility as a service providers, will bring that consumption down. Smoother driving in those. But this last one here is the biggest component. It's also one that I'm perhaps most skeptical of. Vehicle resizing, and the way that these researchers came up with that was largely due to smaller, lighter vehicles consuming less. You can imagine that the engine size, especially for a shared mobility fleet, can be reduced if people aren't driving themselves and the automated system is driving the vehicle more efficiently or not accelerating or braking as hard. You can downsize the engine, so there's some vehicle weight reduction and some energy savings there. They also point to the weight of safety features as well, like just the variety of different safety technologies in the vehicles and being able to save some things there. But again, that's a longer term thing, and I'm not sure that people are going to be wanting to buy vehicles that are giving these up. Any questions on this? Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you know what the effect of maybe doing fewer trips, let's say I have a family of 4, but maybe more of my trips, a lot of my trips now are just me in the vehicle. But if I were to do more, I might have a smaller vehicle just for me, for my commute each day. Where would that fall, do you think? So maybe I'm sharing a smaller vehicle for those commuting times, but I still might have, a larger vehicle for family trips and whatnot.
Right, yeah, for that. So that is, that's a good question. I think that's gonna fall into, partly this, if you're using a smaller vehicle, all else equal more often than a larger vehicle, though they didn't account for it like that, but you're gonna have some energy savings from that. Another thing that we hear is the issue of people who may have a big vehicle for those occasional times when they want to have it and they're very reluctant to give that up. There's a growing business case being made for having access to those larger vehicles for those times when you want to do a road trip or borrow one for 2 weeks and go camping or something like that. So that's something we may see play out in the years to come. That's a good question. Yeah, you had one.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering, you're kind of painting the picture that there's a really large kind of like
range.
One extreme versus the other. Yeah.
That's exactly what this report did. It's not like the old Monte Carlo simulation where you're doing a bunch of different distributions. So the question for those online was pointing out the big range here from the low to the end. And yeah, they do acknowledge that they're really looking at a worst case and a best case. So where that plays out energy wise, yeah, it's hard to say. That's a good
Is there kind of like a general, maybe like people in your area kind of have one, like what are you guys thinking, I guess, in terms of which way it might go one way versus the other?
I think it's going to vary so much by, so where this goes, I think is going to vary so much by location. In urban areas, we're going to see a lot more of the efficiency gains with the lighter electric vehicles and shared mobility. Vehicle ownership is going to continue to go down in those urban areas. So I think we'll see more gains in rural areas and on highway travel, much less so. And then it's so dependent on policies as well. If you look at this, so easier travel could really drive that up. Easy, so you take easier travel and empty miles, right? Those driving things up, but there are policy solutions for that. For instance, better pricing of how we consume highway space through mileage-based user fees or congestion pricing and some things like that. Not that those are easy to do, but it's just an example of how we can ameliorate some of these increasing trends.
Okay, so it seems like that factor is really going to be dependent on like the economics probably as well.
For personal, personal economics of that travel and how expensive is that vehicle, how much is it really able to drive itself and when. We're not talking about these things, and I've got a timeline slide coming up too. We're not talking about these things really happening in just 2 years, despite what you might see in the media. Just this morning, I saw an article that's the title was something to the effect of prepare to be disappointed in the automated vehicles of 2021 or something like that. And that's probably true. It's not like we're going to have these driverless vehicles just bang, we're done. This is going to play out over a generation, really. Okay, so you make these slides available, right, to the class? Okay, so if I'm skipping over some of it, you can always come back and take a look and or follow up with me later. Yeah, go ahead.
If I'm not in the class, can I still have the slides?
Or just get in touch with me and I can give you.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. No, there's nothing here that we wouldn't share. Okay, then a variety of other motivations, jobs creation, other applications related to healthcare mobility for clinics and hospitals, just a variety of things. And then a couple of trigger situations, scenarios for driverless vehicles to navigate. And if you hadn't picked up on it already, this is a plot that we put together just to illustrate the wide variety of issues and things that need to be worked out. So on one hand, you have the partially automated Tesla, which works fine on a clear highway without a lot of traffic and really good pavement marking. On good lighting conditions, all of those nice ideal scenarios, it's fine. But then you diverge from that at all, and you're going to be running into issues already very quickly. So there's those technical kind of issues, but then there's the policy. I think liability, insurance. If it's not on there, it's included as part of liability and legal aspects. Ethics is a pickle too. And I'll touch on that in a little bit when I get to the federal policy. And then some of the land use and planning type of things. I'm definitely not going to get into cybersecurity or privacy issues as part of this presentation, but that's a whole nother big ball of big challenging area that needs to be worked out. Okay, so briefly, how do these things work? And this is a graphic that's up on the website too, if you want to take a look at it again. But these vehicles generally have a suite of different sensors that conventional vehicles don't. So that includes cameras for visualization of things and picking up road signs and that sort of thing. LiDAR is the light version of radar. So radar, radio detection and ranging is radar. This is light. Or laser version of that. And the difference is that it's much more, the wavelengths are much shorter and you get a much more granular detailed view right down to where the stripes on the road are and the openings on the curb. You're able to pick up any little obstacles in great detail. So that's a really essential technology that are going into all these automated vehicles. There are some exceptions. Radar, very common. This is the one that's used for adaptive cruise control. If you're setting your cruise control at a certain speed or following distance, you will that it's using radar to follow the vehicle in front of you. GPS for navigation, and then the other one I'll mention is the onboard base map. It's sometimes a misconception that these vehicles can just be sent off to some destination as though you're just sending them into the wilderness to sense their way through the area. That's not how these work. Maybe someday, but right now they're working with a high definition base map already in the car and updating all the time. Tesla updates theirs overnight, every night, and and then the reason for that is the vehicle does a much better job, and it really lowers the processing load if it knows what to expect as it's going along these roadways. And in a sense, the sensors are just trying to pick up the anomalies or obstacles or things that vary from what it's expecting, and it only has to react to those things. So just keep that in mind. This is a complicated chart, but it's an important one. It is from the Society of Automotive Engineers. And whenever we talk about automation, it's important to remember that we're not talking about conventional versus driverless. There's a range of different things from driver assistance, like the adaptive cruise control that I mentioned, or lane keeping, or parking assist. And then partial automation is like the Tesla that's available now, where it will do lane keeping and adaptive cruise control and maybe some lane changing if the conditions are right. So that's available now. And then you get into some other higher levels of automation. And the blue and the green here, the big distinction is that the continual active monitoring of the driving environment is done by the human at level 2. And then by a system here with some sort of fail-safe if something goes awry. So that's the big color difference here. This, again, is an important reference. I'm not otherwise going through that. Instead, let me show you this version of it where we have from no automation up to full automation. And then it matters where these vehicles are operating. So we have our older vehicles that can operate anywhere. Newer vehicles have all kinds of driver assistant things that you can operate everywhere as well. This semi-autonomous, like the Tesla Autopilot, is level 2, yes, but it really only works on that highway condition that I mentioned. It's not something that's going to function everywhere. And then here again is that important distinction between the driver or the system actively monitoring and paying attention to what's going on. The driverless shuttle that we had here a few weeks ago, is a level 4, but it really only works well like on a campus environment on a fixed route. But yeah, it is a driverless shuttle, but it's not something you're going to be able to just send off into the highway. Advanced testing from companies like Waymo down near Phoenix. Just again, 3-4 weeks ago, they started or they switched to having their vehicles go around with their attendant in the back seat, so that it really is driverless, and if something goes wrong, then they can address it as they go. But that's where the automotive companies are right now. So it is going to be a while before we get to a full automation that can operate everywhere. And so we're moving in this direction, but this is years, maybe decades away before we can solve all of those different edge cases, all of those different policy and liability issues, all the technical issues. That's going to take longer to realize that. And, oh yeah, call that the messy middle. I didn't mention that there's this term driver re-engagement too. So at level 3 in particular, that's a very tricky level because the definition has a driver in the driver's seat, but they don't have to actively pay attention. They just need to be there. If there's a request to re-engage, they have to wake up or do whatever and assess the situation around them and react. All within 8 seconds or however long it took, or however far out in time the sensor was able to detect something. So if you think distracted driving is a problem now, my concern is that as the system takes on more and more of the driving tasks, it's just inviting more of a problem. Now, a lot of automakers are skipping this, and they're saying we're just going to we'll do the driver assistance stuff, but we're going to go work toward level 4 because we just can't deal with this. And I think that's a wise move. So this is an example of what happens at level 2. A year and a half ago down in Florida, The Tesla was operating on autopilot on an expressway, and this truck was turning left in front of it. And not only did the driver not notice, and the driver was ignoring the alerts from the vehicle, the sensors and the software failed to respond appropriately to the truck, and the Tesla just drove right underneath the trailer, and it sheared off the top and killed the driver right away. And the investigation was lengthy, and they, however, found Tesla to be absolved of any culpability here, and it was the driver's fault because it was a level 2 and the driver was supposed to be paying attention. And this is exactly what we don't want to happen. Another example, it's for a dash cam of a Tesla in front of it, entering a work zone where it probably knew from its base map where the lane was, but not where the construction barrier was coming out and the temporary lane markings here. And the vehicle just stayed on that path right into the barrier. This is a Volvo operated by Uber. Similar, well, every situation is different, but whether or not a human driver would react differently is really key. This vehicle, it was at a signalized intersection, and it was with those left turn bays, and there was somebody oncoming that was turning left in front of them, and the sight line was blocked, and the vehicle just came out and they collided with each other. If it had been driven by a human, a lot of us tend to be a little more cautious, because you don't know if somebody's going to be coming out in front of you. It's a very common type of crash, but we need to be doing better than this. This is from Europe, where somebody actually built a very clever trap for an automated vehicle. That's a joke. This is a more detailed slide getting back to alternative paths to full automation. And one is really, so not only do we need to be working on all these edge cases, but the technologies for the ADAS, or the driver assistance systems, are very important, because this whole package of technologies will continue to evolve and improve, and it all plays into it. So I don't want to discount those lower levels of automation, because there are many different things in there that need to be continually improved to make these things work. And if you're curious about that, I do recommend this website, mycardoswhat.org, and you can go and you can explore all the different things there. It's something that I think NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, funded. A lot of good information for consumers. This is a timeline slide that I mentioned, and so we've got driver assistance. It's very common in the next couple of years. There will be other those intermediate vehicles available to consumers. We think Tesla is going to make the level 3 available at some point through their software upgrade. We're starting to see these autonomous shared mobility fleets, like what Waymo. And by the way, Waymo is Google's self-driving unit. Now that Google is part of Alphabet, split off and became Waymo, separate from Google, but both part of Alphabet. So when I say Waymo, I mean it's what Google used to do. And so there's that, plus things that Uber and Lyft and others are doing. And that's going to be probably pretty common by 2025, is where shared mobility you'll have access to a driverless vehicle. I'm saying that high automation is probably going to be required in new vehicles within this 2030 sort of time frame. And then by 2035, we're going to see in many places, particularly urban areas or certain lanes of highways, human-driven operation may no longer be allowed. Not necessarily in the U.S., but in certain parts of the world too. Again, entirely policy and political. And then 2040, again, this is a generational change that we're getting into. And after the fleet turnover will continue, and we're going to really be seeing this trend playing out very clearly by that point. So this is it's a big transformation, something that is probably just as big as from the horse to the automobile of 100 years earlier. So federal policy. Again, I'm going to skip over some of this, but they've got some voluntary guidance. That's really all it is right now. So it isn't really anything that's been through Congress at this point. There are some bills going through, and we'll see how those shake out. But they have these voluntary guidelines that are targeted at those level 3+ vehicles. There are these different safety elements, some guidance for state policy. And in the revision from September 2016 to September 2017, they reduced the safety elements from 15 to 12. And I always think it's telling to show which ones they dropped. There was an administration change as well during that time. For instance, it used to be data recording and sharing. Automakers don't like to share data, so that's gone. Privacy, something hard to put into a voluntary policy. Registration and certification is still being left to states to take care of. So that one is pretty sensible. And then ethical considerations. It's very important, but very hard to put a policy around it right now because it's just really in its infancy about how these things are going to work. If you're curious about those ethical considerations, you may look up MIT's Moral Machine. And what they do is they present the users with a series of either or situations. If you're in a vehicle and there's maybe a brake malfunction, do you run into the pedestrians crossing the crosswalk, or do you veer off and put your occupants at risk? And does it matter if it's a bunch of children or versus one person in the vehicle? Different scenarios like that. And if you're curious, again, look it up. You'll see all kinds of examples. There was one just a week or two ago, and I don't know, some national publication, but the scenario where you're on a 2-lane highway with the rural 2-lane highway with the ditches, and over a rise, a school bus has veered into your lane, and there's a head-on collision. What do you do as a vehicle? Do you avoid it one way or the other? Do you collide? Is there any way to know what's on the other vehicle? What if you're being tailgated by a fuel tanker? It's a very tricky thing to program. All right, and then with all of these complexities, the US DOT put out this solicitation to become a virtual member of an automated proving grounds network. And that's what we applied for. And then in January, we were given that designation along with these other 10. And there's some very prominent things going on in Northern California and Michigan, especially. Texas has a lot of different things, and Florida, same thing. The U.S. Army is one of them. They have an Aberdeen Proving Grounds or Test Center, and it's just $1 billion program or whatever it is. And they do a lot with and they're able to give a lot of feedback and guidance on safety protocols, on testing standards, and how they do things for all of the work that they do there. And okay, so then in Wisconsin's case, we're not centered around a test track. We offer this range of facility types from simulation, like we do in mechanical engineering, other laboratory things, closed track, and I'll show some examples of all of these. Here's the shuttle that we had here. That may be a corporate campus like American Family or Epic, because there are certain things certain vehicles you can operate on private roads that are part of a corporate campus that you can't do on public roads right now. And then we're always working toward public road evaluation because that's where you get the real life experience. I think I'll you just take a look at some of the things on there. So like I said, it's a network. Even the Chippewa Valley Regional Airport, we have an MOU that we're working on with them. They have a FAA designation to do automated ground equipment, not for airplanes, but for the ground equipment that operate at airports. Here's our full-scale driving simulator where we can get into some human factors things. The simulation-based engineering lab, the TOPS lab, is actually my affiliation. And then the simulation lab with mechanical engineering does these high-definition, simulations that include vehicle dynamics. So it's not like your traffic modeling so much, but actual how vehicles interact, and they're able to program in the different sensor types and do hardware in the loop type simulation. This is a very important part of automated vehicle testing and evaluation. Here's the here's a slide. There's some got missed here, but MGA Research operates this test track. It's 400 acres down by Burlington, Wisconsin. It's southeast Wisconsin. And has anybody heard of this? Probably, yeah. It's kind of a secret, and they like it that way because automotive testing needs to be private and confidential and insecure, so they don't have to worry about drones flying over like some of the other proving grounds do. And it's been operated by them for a few decades now. Before that, it was a American Motor Corp facility. If you remember the Jeep or the Gremlin, they were running around out here back then. So that's an important partner in the testing that we do. Road America, it's a racing facility. We're not racing automated vehicles, but it's a place we can do certain types of demonstrations. And then the campus environments. There's another photo up here, a very good example of a tricky situation for anybody. But take a robot and try to drive that through there. And again, it's very hard to program nuance or hand signals of different types or. So it's a very tricky situation, and they take this and you do it at bar time in the winter. It's dark and maybe the snow is obscuring all the pavement markings. Maybe you have accumulated snow built up or ruts or something like that. That's a very, very challenging situation for anyone, but certainly for an automated system. That's why this is going to be taking longer than some people think. And then public roads and the real world experience. This is from February 2008 on I-3990, where the trucks were stuck overnight. Well, everybody was stuck overnight. And so there's that kind of situation. And then some implications on infrastructure as well. So where we might have something with a bunch of on-street parking, maybe as vehicle ownership drops and ride sharing increases, we have some more flexibility to do a pickup drop-off type lane and maybe improve our bicycle accommodation. So there's some opportunities like that. And then on highways and interstates, a potential thing we'll see, and this was brought up by Foxconn a couple of weeks ago too, where they wanted to have folks looking at I-94 and doing a dedicated lane for truck platooning and automated vehicles. So there's some opportunities there for something like that. Okay. And then our Madison connected vehicle. Again, we can talk about automated and connected separately. I just wanted to make sure you were aware that on Park Street here, we're working on getting some instrumentation integrated with the traffic signals to work on these connected vehicle applications. And this is an excerpt of a US DOT's list of connected vehicle applications, and there are many, many of them. And when it comes, again, bring it back to the energy implications, there's this whole suite of applications that can be enabled by vehicle communication with other vehicles and with the infrastructure and traffic signals. And this is another effect that we'll see come into play, depending on, again, policy-wise, resource-wise, to what extent we can pursue these type of applications. That's going to have the energy implications as well. Then stop me again if you got questions. Otherwise, I'm coming to the end because you may have some other questions or things you want to talk about. Regarding the Governor's Committee on Connected and Automated Vehicle Testing and Deployment, Governor Walker issued an executive order in May to create this, again, prompted in part by some questions that were coming up or issues that were being forced by different vehicles operating here, including from us, and we wanted to be able to run certain things on public roads. So we put this group together. It's chaired by the WSDOT secretary, and there's the different groups here. There are two of us from UW-Madison that are on the committee. We've met just a few times. The meetings are public, and we've been meeting monthly, though the December one, I think, is canceled. Again, there's different levels of interest in actually doing the dive into this from the different people that are involved. But it's an important step. We're going to be taking that look at the statutes and things that need to be modified to make sure we allow this kind of technology to proliferate here. This is the shuttle demo I mentioned that was here. No public rides, but we could at least trailer it up to the Capitol and have it out there. This is at the end of one of those committee meetings. This is that little two-seater Innova Dash. Another view of the vehicle on campus. So again, it was good for public outreach purposes, which is an important part of our work, but we weren't able to do any data collection or really get feedback on the user experience. So we'll try again in the spring. And then, this is again, because we couldn't drive it around, we had it on Engineering Drive just across the street here, and we brought out a handful of other all-electric vehicles, well, or a mix. So two-seater Innova Dash. This is a Ford Escape that our mechanical engineering automotive group converted to operate on a Chevy Volt battery package. And then they're right now adding another engine that operates on ethanol. 2017 Tesla S. And MG&E has a Chevy Bolt. Yeah, I got that right. This is a Chevy Bolt, the smaller one, and all electric. And then the Navia shuttle there, electric and driverless. So that's what I had. I do have, for those interested, I have some handouts here, like the SAE levels, and there's that chart. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but first come, first serve if you want to grab anything afterwards and some other things there. So yeah, other questions, arguments.
What is Wisconsin's place in sort of the pantheon of this in the country? I mean, we've seen just precious little written about this in the popular press.
Mm-hmm.
Second question, any startups related to this here?
Not yet, no. To answer the second question, in terms of startups here, there's really nothing very prominent where years away from Northern California type of startups in the AI and software and the algorithm developers and the sensor fusion things that are going on. A lot of that's happening in Northern California. And then on the automotive side, certainly in Michigan, those are the two hotspots in the US. Mm-hmm. In terms of Wisconsin's place in this, the designation that we got in January was a good validation of the bits and pieces of work that we had going on already and that we were able to bring together to get this designation. But at the same time, there was a change in the DOT secretary. We had our state budget over the summer, and transportation was a big part of that. And so that really stalled some of the state involvement and support in this. And there's only so much you can do with, so there's industry, academia, and government. And if government's just not part of it, there's only so much you can do with the other two. But they'll come back around. And as an example of that, with Foxconn coming in, and I don't know if you guys didn't hear about that, DOT was talking about rebuilding I-94, and then in discussion with Foxconn, they really pushed the state and the DOT to include consideration of automated and connected vehicle technologies, including a dedicated lane potentially. So that was a welcome motivator, I guess, for DOT that may help things take off. We're still at the beginning of such a big, long transition, and there are just billions and billions and billions, tens of billions being invested every year worldwide, that there's no way we can't be involved in this. And by having this designation and building on the work that we do, I think we're well positioned to really be a meaningful player in the area. We aren't going to be leading the automotive side like is happening in Michigan or the software in Northern California, but all those other edge cases and implications on land use and so forth, human factors are all things that we have a good opportunity to work on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'll have a follow-up, but let him get his question.
Well, I think we have WebPAC. I want to comment on that. And Bob Lorenz, I think, has a response C motion. But my question really is, have you worked with Andrea Hicks for life cycle assessment on the carbon footprint of some of the questions that you brought up earlier in your talk?
No, I know Andrea, but the cost and energy side is not something that I've engaged with her on in terms of the vehicle technologies.
Well, maybe some of the students would be interested if you write a proposal with her.
Right. Yeah, thanks for the prod.
So is Wharf interested in this area? And if so, are they, stepping up to the plate at all?
I hope you are, Worf. I'm looking into the camera. Yeah.
I mean, we're right in their neighborhood too, right?
Yeah. No, we haven't had engagement with Worf.
I'm just wondering, we have lots of people who write algorithms here and, just how much is computer science, heavily engaged in this? Are we writing algorithms or are we just using other people's stuff?
It's more the latter at this point. So many of these technical things are not only am I able to talk about them very intelligently with my transportation engineering background, but the very technical things, again, we're so far behind where some of the other research centers are in the country and the world that that will inevitably be building up, not only here, but elsewhere. But it's not something that we're really focusing on right now. We don't have a very, we're not like the robotics group at Carnegie Mellon, for instance.
We do make a lot of electronics for the automotive industry over in the Milwaukee area. Is there any connection to that or?
Yeah, we being the state?
Yeah, I mean,
Or businesses within Wisconsin.
Right. Mm-hmm. And, the sort of the Foxconn thing, is that going to get connected to this? Or?
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, for sure. And folks like MGA and Road America have those good connections with automakers and the suppliers. And we also have companies that do LiDAR data technologies right here in town. There's Manley, Roadview, and Continental Mapping.
Yeah, I know all of those.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and they're involved with us too.
We also have, I don't know if you know Traffic Cast, that company.
Yep.
My son works for them, so.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Keep that in mind. Anyway, that's one of the world's leading manipulators of data to do with what vehicles are doing, where they're going, telling people at this point. But that's what.
Yeah. Yep. We've worked with Traffic Cast and their Blue Toads.
Have you?
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. As part of our lab. Yeah. Professor Ben Ron has a family connection with Traffic Cast and Transport.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Have you heard anything about the development of smart roadways that could probably add to the infrastructure?
Yeah. That's something I didn't get into. There's on the one hand, some automakers are saying, look, we have to have these vehicles be able to operate anywhere without relying on any particular infrastructure. But there's also a strong case to be made for that smart infrastructure, smart roadways with their own sensors and the communication with those vehicles for additional detection. Because the vehicle itself and its own sensors can only see so far. But if you have very high definition video up on a pole and you have a broader view, that can alleviate some of the demands on the vehicle itself. Just as an example, there's in pavement wireless charging, for the power side of things. That's a concept that's being explored, and then the roadside, the road signs, including the electronic message boards across there. We're probably not going to have to invest in those as much because we'll have all the same data collection going on, but that can then just be broadcast through networks into the vehicle itself. So it's something that's really evolving hand in hand. But to the extent whether, so I mentioned some automakers are saying we just need to operate regardless. Others are saying we need to have the smart pavement and road signs as well, smart pavement marking, the striping, and the road signs as well. And that will work that may help in some circumstances, but then it'll snow, things will be obscured. So unless they're wired up or communicating something electronically, you're still going to have that visual problem. Or if it's foggy, you can't see the signs, or when the snow cakes onto those road signs. There's all kinds of issues like that that come up in snowy environments.
Things that bother actual drivers too.
Yeah, things that bother actual drivers too. So part of the solution though is to rely on that HD base mapping, and that's kind of what like TrafficCast and RoadView and these other companies are doing. TomTom, here, formerly Nokia, Navtech, Waymo, and Google. Actually, this is Google. Their base mapping was part of that. Yeah, it's a good question, but it's kind of a murky area. I'm not sure how it's going to play out.
I'm curious of your opinion about Tesla, and they still aren't using LiDAR and say that they don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view on
that? Elon Musk is considerably more successful than I am. So
I'm just taking the minority view on that.
Who am I to argue? Yes, it is a minority. So Tesla is one of those automakers that eschews the use of LiDAR, relying just on video and camera for them. I'm sorry, video and radar for those. And I think as the technologies for both video and radar continue to improve and they can do more with it, that will solve a lot of the limitations that they may have now. Or that maybe they will start adopting LiDAR once the price comes down, or maybe they're developing their own or lower profile things, because these are those cans that sit on top of the vehicles right now and spin around.
Yeah, but they're developing a really small one now. I don't know if it's done yet.
Yeah, they do come really small, but then at the expense of accuracy and range. Yeah, so it's all trying to just make them really robust but compact. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are you doing anything to develop scenarios describing the likely transition costs and paths forward? In other words, we're going to transition from where we are today to, you can imagine.
Some driverless utopia.
And we're going to go through a transition. It's going to require, for some time, we've seen this in other technologies, we're going to have multiple technologies on board a car to go from one place to another, because not all the technology will be available, say, on an interstate or on a back road will be available on an interstate.
Yeah, that's for sure, right.
So it seems to me that in particular for policymakers, they would be interested in a scenario analysis that would evaluate the likelihoods of several different scenarios playing out, probabilities associated with each one.
Yeah.
Giving an idea as to what the cost of transition might be.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for that. This person may.
Go ahead.
If
you're familiar with Elisa Graffy's document on the death spiral of the power industry, which is familiar with what Don's asking about the sunk costs that they have to deal with, and she compares that to the bus system. And I'm just looking at her paper again, but I highly recommend reading Elisa Graffy's paper on the death spiral of the power companies.
An important distinction perhaps with power is that the personal mobility is so industry driven, and there's so much investment from the private sector, and transportation, especially the highway networks, is very different from a utility. Not that it couldn't benefit from being construed as a utility, as a public agency, but that's a whole different conversation. And as the vehicle technologies themselves are invested in so heavily by the private sector, and there continues to be a strong consumer demand for these, that's going to play out on its own, and regardless of certain regulatory environments, including the insurance and liability issues. That insurance is a private, has its own regulation, but insurance and the cost of those travels, or the cost of the travel, or the savings from the safety gains are all intertwined into their own markets. And we have some ability from the policy standpoint, but that only goes so far when you have when it is so privately driven. So I'm speculating here a bit, but in terms of how this is playing out, how this transition plays out, I think a couple important things to remember are, let's see how they navigate this era of partial automation. You know, a lot of companies, like I said, are going to skip that. Others may force the issue of liability even more by incrementally going up that, and hopefully we don't have too much of a safety problem. Yeah, and then the infrastructure question plays into that as well, about how much public investment may or may not be justified to support these additional technologies. On the connected vehicle side, we're at our time here, but on the connected vehicle side, a lot of these applications rely on roadside radio communications. And some places are doing those, the dedicated short-range communications, while others are saying, no, we're not going to invest in that, it's just too expensive. And we have 4G pretty ubiquitously now, and the latency isn't that bad. And then we're going to have 5G, and the latency will be almost as good as the DSRC. And it's yeah. So.
Isn't that accuracy becoming like the way that other than when it's cloudy, of course. I don't know what do we do when it's cloudy, I don't know.
For what? For
figuring out where the car is instead of worrying about lane markings and so on. I mean,
yeah.
Cars will talk to each other, vehicles will talk to each other. Oh, I'm here, you're here, okay, fine. Here's the edge of the road, by the way. Oh, yeah. It's like me driving in the middle of snow blinding on the New York State Thruway, which I did many times years ago.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing you can see is that guardrail. You just keep that in the corner of your eye, and that's how you decide. And then you can keep an eye out for somebody else in front of you. That's it. You don't know where you are. You don't know where the exit is even.
That's right. Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah.
You know? I mean,
it's working as well as it is.
Accidents. It's kind of surprising, actually, when you think about it in today's world. People follow so much more closely.
Any last questions? Otherwise, I just want to respect time and make sure we wrap up. But I can hang out for a little bit if you guys want to chat more or grab a handout. Yeah, one last one.
You're not currently racing them, but are there plans to race the automated vehicles?
Yeah, that does exist. Yeah, robotic car races. Yeah, for sure. There was a company out of Italy, I think, that contacted us and asked if we got a facility like that. I think they ended up somewhere at one of the other warmer climate places.
Formula ER.
ER?
No, there's already Formula E.
Oh, sure. Yeah, good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah.